What happens when a Hollywood icon's legacy gets trampled by a host's ego? The answer shook the studio when Clint Eastwood, a living legend, clashed with Jimmy Kimmel in a live interview that turned into a firestorm. Eastwood was there to share his new Western, Last Frontier, a film he directed and starred in, honoring the grit of small-town America. But Kimmel, oozing arrogance, had other plans, unleashing a fiery attack that exposed his true character. This is a story of defiance you won't want to miss, so hit subscribe and drop your thoughts below, because this showdown is pure dynamite. Trouble brewed long before the lights came up at Jimmy Kimmel Live. Eastwood arrived at the studio, his quiet strength filling the room as he greeted the crew with a nod and a warm handshake. He spoke softly about Last Frontier, a project born from his love for stories of ordinary folks standing tall. The crew was charmed, one sound tech calling him a class act who made everyone feel seen. But when Kimmel strode in, the mood soured, fast. He barely acknowledged Eastwood, grumbling to his producer about having to deal with another old-school star who thinks he's king. Kimmel's resentment wasn't new. Insiders said he'd been testy lately, annoyed by guests who outshone him. Eastwood, with his towering legacy, was a perfect target for Kimmel's bruised pride. In the pre-show meeting, Kimmel scoffed at Eastwood's team asking for a focus on the film's themes. "I'm not his errand boy," he snapped, crumpling their notes. His producer urged him to keep it light, but Kimmel's smirk said he was itching for a fight, and Eastwood, calm and unsuspecting, was in his crosshairs. When the show kicked off, the audience erupted as Eastwood walked on, his steely gaze and easy grin commanding the stage. Kimmel stayed seated, offering a half-hearted clap and a smile as thin as a razor. "Great to have you, Clint," he said, his tone cold, like he was reading a script he didn't like. "So this new cowboy flick, what's the deal? Still riding horses at your age?" The jab landed awkwardly, and a few audience members frowned, sensing the disrespect. Eastwood chuckled, unfazed, and started talking about the film's heart, the strength of small-town folks. But Kimmel wasn't listening. He leaned forward, cutting Eastwood off. "Come on, Clint, isn't this Western stuff a bit, dusty? Who's watching that in today's world?" The audience stiffened, the insult clear. Eastwood's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed steady. "It's not about trends, Jimmy. It's about people who fight for what's right, no matter the odds. That's timeless." Kimmel's grin turned sharp. "Timeless, huh? Or just a way to cash in on your old gunslinger image?" The accusation stung, and Eastwood's jaw tightened, a flicker of steel in his gaze. The storm was brewing, and it was about to break. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio felt like a powder keg, with Kimmel's sharp jab about Clint Eastwood's gunslinger image still ringing in the air. The audience, sensing the host's hostility, waited for Eastwood's response, their cheers for the legend fading into uneasy quiet. Eastwood's steady gaze locked on Kimmel, his voice calm but firm. "This film isn't about image, Jimmy. It's about real people standing up for their homes." But Kimmel's smirk only grew, his ego fueling a vicious attack that would shock everyone. "Stick with us, because this clash is about to burn hotter." Kimmel leaned back, tossing his hands up with mock surprise. "Real people? Clint, come on, this Western of yours is just a nostalgia trip for folks who miss the good old days. It's not exactly deep." The audience gasped, stunned by the dismissal of Last Frontier's heartfelt story. Eastwood's fingers tapped the armrest, but he kept his cool, his words deliberate. "I made this film for the farmers, the shopkeepers, the folks who hold communities together. Their stories matter, always will." The crowd clapped, moved by his conviction, but Kimmel's eyes rolled, undeterred. "You're preaching to the choir, Clint," Kimmel said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be honest, this is just you playing cowboy again, right? Milking that tough guy act for a paycheck." The insult cut deep, and murmurs rippled through the crowd, some shaking meteorological heads in disbelief. Eastwood's face tightened, but he pushed back, voice low and strong. I don't play at anything, Jimmy. I tell stories that need telling, and I do it with respect for the people who live them. That's more than you're doing right now. Kimmel's laugh was sharp, like a blade slicing through the tension. Respect? That's cute, coming from a guy who's been recycling the same, squinting hero routine for decades. The audience fell silent, the disrespect blatant. A man in the back row whispered to his wife, "He's crossing a line." Eastwood tried to steer back, sharing a story about a rancher who inspired the film, but Kimmel cut him off. Save the campfire. Tails, Clint. Nobody's buying this as some grand mission. You're just dusting off your spurs for one last ride. The crowd's discomfort grew, their applause for Eastwood drowned by Kimmel's relentless jabs. A camera operator later said, the producer was signaling wildly from the wings, begging Kimmel to ease up, but the host pressed on, his grin cold. You talk about community, Clint, but this film's just a relic, like those old westerns nobody watches anymore. You're out of touch, and you know it. The accusation was a gut punch, dismissing Eastwood's vision, and the studio air thickened, every eye on the legend's response. Eastwood's patience visibly frayed, his hand clenching briefly before he spoke, voice like gravel. Out of touch? I've spent my life listening to people, learning their struggles. You might try that instead of mocking what you don't understand. The audience erupted, cheering Eastwood's stand, but Kimmel, stung by the rebuke, leaned forward, his voice venomous. Oh, please, Clint, spare us the wisdom. You're pushing 90, still pretending you're the big man on screen. Isn't it time to hang up the hat? The personal dig at Eastwood's age was a fiery low blow, and the crowd froze, stunned by Kimmel's cruelty. Eastwood's eyes blazed, his calm cracking as he prepared to fire back. The Jimmy Kimmel live studio was a tinderbox, Kimmel's cruel jab at Clint Eastwood's age hanging like smoke in the air. The audience, loyal to the legend, held their breath, eyes fixed on Eastwood, whose blazing stare could have burned a hole through steel. His voice, rough as sandpaper, cut through the silence. You've got some guts, Jimmy, mocking a man's years when you can't match his work. This wasn't just a reply, it was a gauntlet thrown down, and the fight was about to roar. Stay tuned, because this clash shows who truly stands tall in Hollywood. Eastwood's words struck like a hammer, and the crowd erupted, clapping fiercely for their hero. He pressed on, his tone sharp but steady. I've been making films for 60 years, telling stories that matter. You want to talk age? How about the courage it takes to keep creating, to honor people's lives? You wouldn't know courage if it walked on your stage. The audience roared louder, some standing, but Kimmel's face twisted with fury. He leapt from his chair, voice booming with spite, determined to claw back control. Courage? Kimmel sneered, jabbing a finger at Eastwood. Don't give me that, Clint. You're just trotting out the same tired westerns, pretending you're still relevant. This isn't 1970 and you're not Dirty Harry anymore. The insult was a dagger, slashing at Eastwood's legacy, and gasps echoed through the studio. A woman in the front row clutched her purse, muttering about Kimmel's nerve. Eastwood's jaw clenched, but he stayed rooted, his voice low and fierce. Relevance isn't about chasing fads, Jimmy. It's about doing work that lasts, something you clearly don't understand. Kimmel paced, his eyes wild, feeding off the tension. Oh, I understand plenty, Clint. I understand you're a relic, clinging to a world that's moved on. Your films? They're for dusty old theaters, not real audiences. The crowd booed, their loyalty to Eastwood unshaken. But Kimmel ignored them, his voice rising. I've heard the stories, how you bark orders on set, scare your crews. You're not a legend, you're a bully with a camera. The accusation was venomous, and the studio felt like it might crack under the strain. Eastwood stood now, his towering presence silencing the room, his words like a whip. "You call me a bully? Look in the mirror, Jimmy. You're the one tearing down a guest to prop up your ego. I came here to talk about a film that honors hardworking folks, and you've turned it into a circus." The audience cheered, their applause, a rebuke to Kimmel's cruelty. The producer, off stage, was waving frantically, his face pale, mouthing "commercial" to the crew. But Kimmel pushed forward, his ego blinding him to the chaos. "You think you're above this, don't you?" Kimmel shouted, slamming his desk. "I've interviewed bigger names than you, Clint, and I don't bow to anyone, especially not some has-been cowboy." The insult was a wildfire, and Eastwood's eyes narrowed, his voice deadly calm. "Has-been? I've built more with one film than you will in a lifetime of cheap laughs. You're not hosting. You're humiliating yourself." The standoff was electric, the air thick with defiance. The producer finally rushed on stage, grabbing Kimmel's shoulder. "Jimmy, we're cutting now," he hissed, as the cameras jerked away, the studio spiraling into disorder. Backstage at Jimmy Kimmel Live, the echoes of the onstage clash lingered like dust after a stampede. The cameras were dark, but the battle between Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel burned on, its heat radiating. Through the cramped corridors, crew members stood in hushed clusters, their whispers sharp with disbelief at Kimmel's venom and admiration for Eastwood's steel. This wasn't just a talk show meltdown, it was a reckoning, and the truth was raw. Keep watching, because what unfolded next proves who holds true grit when the curtains fall. Kimmel burst into the backstage area, his face flushed, jacket slung over his shoulder like he hadn't a care. "He's just a grumpy old man," he scoffed to his producer, loud enough for nearby grips to hear. "I gave him a dose of truth, and he choked on it." The producer, frazzled, mopped his brow. "Jimmy, you pushed too hard. The network's getting calls already." Kimmel snorted, tossing his head. "Let them whine. This is my stage, not Clint's." But the crew's sidelong glances told a different story. One electrician muttering, "He's been bullying people here for years." Eastwood, meanwhile, stood near the green room, his presence steady as an oak, speaking quietly with his assistant. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the room, missing nothing. A young runner approached, nervous but bold. "Mr. Eastwood, that was incredible out there. Nobody stands up to Jimmy like that." Eastwood's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Thanks, kid. Sometimes you have to draw a line, no matter who's on the other side." The runner beamed, darting off to tell a sound tech who nodded, saying Kimmel never even learned their names. The tension spiked as Kimmel sauntered over, his grin forced, like a man trying to rewrite a bad scene. "Clint, let's not make a big deal out of this," he said, his voice oily. "Just some TV spice. Keeps the ratings up, right?" Eastwood turned, his gaze cold enough to freeze fire. "You think this is a game, Jimmy? You disrespected my work, my film, and the people it's for. That's not spice, it's spite." Kimmel's jaw tightened, his charm crumbling. "Don't act so high and mighty, Clint. You're not the only one who's tough around here." The crew held their breath, watching the showdown. Eastwood stepped closer, his voice low, each word heavy. "Tough? You don't know the meaning of it. I've worked with folks who faced real fights, not just thrown punches on a soundstage. You mocked their story tonight, and that's something you can't take back." Kimmel's eyes flashed, but his voice wavered. "Oh, come off it, Clint. You're just mad I called you out for being yesterday's news." The jab was weak, and the crew's murmurs grew, one stagehand whispering about Kimmel's tantrum over a botched cue last month. A security guard lingered nearby, hands fidgeting, unsure if trouble was brewing, but the producer waved him back, his face taut. Eastwood's assistant tapped his shoulder, murmuring about their ride waiting, and Eastwood nodded, turning toward the exit. "I'm finished here," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "But hear this, Jimmy. Real strength isn't in tearing others down, it's in building something worth keeping." He walked toward the door, his boots echoing, leaving Kimmel stranded in a sea of judging eyes, his power fading with every step Eastwood took. The backstage corridor of Jimmy Kimmel Live was a battlefield of silence. Clint Eastwood's steady strides toward the exit cutting through the tension like a blade. His words about real strength had left Kimmel exposed, and the crew watched, their respect for the legend growing with every step. This wasn't just a departure. It was a stand for dignity that would echo far beyond the studio. You'll want to hear this final chapter, so hit subscribe and share your thoughts below, because this is a lesson in grit that hits deep. As Eastwood neared the door, Kimmel made a last-ditch effort, his voice cracking with forced ease. "Clint, hold up, let's not end it like this," he called, jogging closer. "It's just TV, a little heat for the crowd, you get it." Eastwood paused, turning slowly, his eyes like flint, sparking with quiet power. "You don't get it, Jimmy. You didn't. Just heat things up. You spit on a story about people who deserve better. You showed everyone what you're made of, and it's not much." The rebuke was calm but crushing, and Kimmel's face fell, his bravado gone. The crew, scattered along the hallway, exchanged nods, their whispers bold now. A props worker murmured to a friend, "He's right, Jimmy's always been a jerk behind the scenes." Eastwood's assistant stood ready at the door, but a veteran cameraman stepped forward, his voice low. "Mr. Eastwood, thank you for saying what we've all thought. You're the real deal." Eastwood gave a curt nod, his gaze softening. "Appreciate that. Sometimes you have to call out what's wrong, no matter the stage." The cameraman grinned, turning to share the moment with others. Kimmel stood rooted, his hands clenched, as the weight of his actions sank in. The next morning, the clash was front-page news, with papers calling Kimmel's attack a disgrace. Fans of Last Frontier flooded theaters, inspired by Eastwood's defense of its values, while community groups praised his respect for small-town life. Kimmel's show, though, took a hit. Viewers wrote angry letters, and big-name guests pulled out, wary of his mean streak. Ratings plummeted, a clear sign the public had turned on the host who'd crossed a legend. Stories of Kimmel's backstage tirades surfaced, with a former writer revealing he'd berated staff for minor mistakes. A lighting tech quit, saying she was done with his ego. The network, scrambling, announced a short break for the show, but Kimmel's shine was tarnished, his charm no match for the truth Eastwood had laid bare. In Hollywood, people spoke of Clint's stand with reverence, a moment that redefined strength, not as loud bravado, but as quiet, unyielding principle. Eastwood stayed true to his way, avoiding interviews about the fight, focusing instead on his film's message. At a Last Frontier premiere, he dedicated the night to the everyday folks who inspired it, earning cheers that shook the room. The takeaway was simple. When someone tries to tear you down, you don't need to shout back, just stand firm with what's right. That's the kind of power that endures, the kind that lifts others up. So when you face disrespect, think of Eastwood's walk through that door, chin high, heart steady, and know you can hold your ground too.